Welcome to another free ASTQB software testing webinar. Today we'll be talking about a topic that's been quite hot recently, which is Agile testing, and that's also been pushed forward quite a bit by the ASTQB Agile certification. If you want information about that following the webinar, you can always learn more at www.astqb.org. Today we're going to talk about 7 habits of highly effective Agile. What we do or not do in order to effectively implement Agile in an organization is critical. And our guest speaker today, Philip Liu, CEO of Exposoft, draws upon 10 years of working with his company's clients in Agile implementation. Phil will explain that throughout the years, they've accumulated a wealth of experience and have found common factors that either lead to success or failure. In this webinar, Phil will outline 7 good habits that you should follow in order to successfully implement Agile. Many of these habits you hopefully already know, like having a solid definition of done, but you might not realize that some of your ways are hurting your chances of success. Today we'll find out what you're missing that could be those keys to your success. At this point, I'd like to introduce Phil, and Phil, take it away.
Thanks, Dave. It's great to be here, and good afternoon, everyone. Let's see here. Why don't we just get started? First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about where I got the 7 habits of, and it came from an article that I published online with ASTQB, and the article was based on some work that we had done with one of our clients in implementing Agile, and I was discussing some of the failures that we had had together with them and how we had overcome some of these, I guess you could say, roadblocks. Setting expectations, you know, I won't read slides. I figure you guys can all read. But the slides are for you as a takeaway, and what I'll do is I'll focus on some important points as well as give some examples and so forth as we go on today. Attendees are welcome to ask questions via the question panel and GoToWebinar, so please ask questions as we go along. Because sometimes when I'm discussing something, it's great to have a question right on that at the time rather than at the end, because I may forget 30 minutes later because I'm getting a little bit old. So here we go. This is a little bit about me. You can find me on LinkedIn and all this stuff here and more. I think what's more interesting is that I'm an avid cyclist, and I just love getting on my bike and riding out in the middle of nowhere. I think that back when I was younger, I used to do bike races, and I think that bike racing is very similar to Agile in that you really have to work closely together with your teammates, and you have to know exactly where everybody is all the time and what they're doing, what their behavior will be, and you have to have a really close communication. And so I've taken a lot of lessons from my bike racing days into Agile and working with our clients. And I think that a note that Dave said just a minute ago, that in terms of the failures, failure is not bad. I just met with the client this morning, and they were talking about some of their goals and objectives that they had for their next release of software. And I said, well, that's a lot to get done. And they said, well, not really. Based on all of our failures, we've really learned a lot. So failure is not necessarily bad. So really it's about you today and why you're here, and I think I have the answer to that. Feel free to type in stuff if there's some burning questions that you really want to know the answer to. But I think today is really about some things that have brought Agile to the forefront. And one of the things that people don't really realize is that Agile has really come to the forefront because of mobile and cloud. And so the mobile and cloud platforms have really driven us to be faster at things. This combined with changes in business models, where we're now working with subscription-based business models, where we're constantly trying to upgrade our clients or upgrade our users to give them the latest and the greatest rather than having them wait for a year because we wanted them to continue their subscription with us. And this demands changes in the way we work. So Agile really fits this type of change where we work together in smaller teams and do faster iterations. The thing that's really interesting that's not on the slide here that I think about is in terms of the hurdles to starting up a software company are so much lower now. If you think about it, 10 years ago, when we started up a software company, we needed to have $10 million in funding, and we needed to have a software development team of 30 guys, and product marketing and sales organization, and next thing you know, a startup company was 100 guys. And now, because of software tooling and infrastructures that are much easier to get up and get started with cloud and shared structures, we can get started with a small company with 10 guys. And that's kind of the roots of Agile, is that you've got a lot of these small companies getting together and forming. And so we have to find ways for small companies to work closer together, and that's what Agile does. So with respect to Agile, there's no one flavor of Agile that works for everyone. Scrum and Kanban are probably the most popular ones, but there's no embarrassment to being, 60% Agile or whatever. I think that a lot of our clients say, oh, well, we're trying to be Agile or we're almost Agile. Well, there is no such thing as trying to be Agile or almost Agile. You're either Agile or you're not. But the definition of Agile does not mean that you have to conform to one of these recipes. If your sprints are 3 weeks instead of 2, according to the Scrum model, that's okay. If you're collaborating much closer than you would be in Waterfall and getting feedback from the product owner on a regular basis, that's the main goal. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have stand-up meetings every day. The goal of the stand-up meeting, remember, is to get people to work closer together. So maybe the stand-up meeting just doesn't work for you. That doesn't necessarily mean you're not Agile. So as I mentioned a minute ago, I did write an article a while back on implementing Agile with one of our clients and some of the lessons that we learned there. And what I found was that with this client, as well as many of our clients, success and failure really does not ride on the tools that you use, but really a lot of it has to do with the human factor in the way that we work together and things like that, rather than conforming to a recipe and so on. So what I'd like to cover today is some of those. What I've done is group some of those things into 7 what I call habits or ways of doing things that I think, or not ways of doing things, that I think can help you guys to implement Agile effectively. And possibly learn from some of the mistakes that I've seen along the way. Here's a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge. It's a really massive structure. It opened in 1937. It took 4 years to build. What's interesting about the Golden Gate Bridge is that, and by the way, this is the last fancy picture I'll put up. A lot of the slides have words on them, and I'm sorry about that. A lot of people complain, oh, there's too many words and so forth. But like I said, I'm not going to read through the slides. The thing about the Golden Gate Bridge is it represents an engineering feat in the construction industry or civil engineering, which is a fairly modern field. And you can see from here, I pulled this from the internet, it's a pretty complicated project. And yet it was pulled off fairly successfully. It was the longest suspension bridge at the time. And there's a ton of logistics involved in putting it all together. And to me, it's amazing that it all worked out and we can still drive across it almost a century later. And so when I think about the Golden Gate Bridge and I think about software, software is relatively new compared to civil engineering. And so That's why when we had waterfall and multi-year projects, they tended to fail because it was something very, very new. And so to me, software, we still don't know quite what we're doing. And so that's why we need a piecemeal approach, I call it, but really it's called Agile, where we take a step and then we figure out what we need to do next. And we do this in our everyday lives. Maybe we eat something and it doesn't quite fit with our stomachs, and we say, okay, well, I won't eat that anymore. We don't have a long-term plan for many things in our lives, and we adapt along the way. And really, Agile is really just that applied to software. So the number one thing that I think that I've come across in terms of success or failure factors in working with our clients is working closely with the customer. And I think today, as we go on through these 7 habits, there probably will not be anything new to you, but possibly some different ways or angles of looking at things. And I think probably one of the biggest factors of failure is that the product owner is not involved closely enough with the team. And so for me, I say, if we're doing Agile, and one of the biggest proponents or positive factors of Agile is that you have to get closer to the requirements so that you understand the requirements if they're changing. If the product owner is not involved on a daily basis, prioritizing requirements so that you can focus on the minimum viable product, that's a really bad way to get started if you don't have that. It can't be, the product owner cannot be somebody that's part-time, I don't believe. It's not somebody that says, oh yeah, I'll get to the prioritizing the backlog today after I finish my other job. It can't be that way. The product owner has to be 100% dedicated to the product. So when it comes to understanding the customer, I like to apply the 80-20 rule. And I guess we all know that 80% of the product is, or 80% of our users, well, you could use 20% of the product. So we really need to think about how our users will be using the product. So I think that that's important. Some people call it usability testing. Other people will call it something else. But I think it's really important to do this in the beginning, but also as we go with each iteration and seeing how the customers or the end users will use the product rather than waiting to the very end. And a lot of times we can do this with somebody that's not familiar with the product is probably the best way to do it, so that we can get that valuable feedback after each iteration before moving forward. So this means that maybe it's not just the product owner that's involved, but also end users or would-be end users that will be using our product in the end. Keep team sizes small. I've got a lot to say about this. I think a lot of companies that are first moving from waterfall to agile, their team sizes are too big. And a lot of it is part of the organizational structure. But I'm going to talk a little bit about team sizes here, and cross-functional teams. That's kind of a big word, and what that really means is that you've got people on your team. You've got all the ingredients to make the dish, basically. You've got all the spices, the main course, and so forth. And so if you want to make a meal, you have to have everybody there. And what happens if you don't have everybody there where you have all the ingredients? That means you have to wait. And so waiting goes contrary to what Agile is all about, right? So we want to have all the team members with all the skills that we need on that team. And we want that team to be small. Because to be able to go fast, I call it a full stack team, right? You have to have everybody on the team and have the team be autonomous and working together, figuring out problems together. You don't want to have, oh, we have to wait for Joe, who's in another department, and Joe happens to be busy right now on some other project. So you have to have the full capabilities of what you need to get the product done within your team. Secondly, if you have a small team and everybody's studied communication models, the communication channels with 2 people versus 3 people and so on, if you have a large team, that definitely expands the communication channels exponentially or even logarithmically. So you don't want to have a large team. We recommend that Agile teams have anywhere between 7 and 10 members. Depending on the skills that you can accumulate within your team to get the job done, like I said, having everybody together that can make the meal. More slide about big teams and large teams and versus small teams. Bigger teams, what happens is you end up having disciplines formed with a couple of guys within that team. I guess you could call them subgroups. And to me, what I've found is that really inhibits communication and collaboration amongst all of the team members. Not only that, sometimes you have, it's easier to have misunderstandings and therefore disrupting your cadence, as well as dispersing your focus. Because if you're having communication issues, then of course there's a focus problem. Promoting a shared understanding, this is related to team size. So when you hire new team members come into the team, it's important to stop and initiate new team members and answer questions, ask questions to make everybody on the same page. So this could be things as simple as, what the definition of done is, or how work is assigned, or possibly understanding what skills the new person has that you may not know about from stuff that's not on the resume. Also, it enables, you could say, a reinforcement of the entire team's understanding, and also thinking about that in understanding within a team sometimes shifts and morphs during the process. So what you had understood 3 or 4 iterations ago, that may change, and you need to have a resetting or reinforcing of the way that the team is thinking. Maybe you've changed, maybe you actually have changed the definition of done, or maybe the definition of done is different for different situations. So that's important as well. Continuing on this, I think it's important to not make assumptions and ask lots of questions. One of the things that I've seen happen and take place and very successful is bringing new team members up to speed quickly, is having XP programming techniques where you have pairs working together, an experienced person with a newbie, and not necessarily a newbie from the aspect of being a new programmer. Perhaps they've got 10 years of programming experience, but the point is that to build that communication channel between the programmers and enable them to see how programming is done on your project. This could be things with the way that interfaces work between each other, the way that integration happens, some of your standards with respect to the front interface, the menu design, and so forth. Because remember, we're talking about having less documentation in Agile, and so we've got to have ways to work together closely other than having the stand-up meetings, because stand-up meetings are you really don't have time to cover a lot of the details that you really need to know when you're working together. So we've seen XP programming work very well in bringing new team members up to speed quickly and understanding how the team works and how programming is done for that particular project. Can't talk enough about collaboration. I think email is necessary, but I think that one should not be fooled that email is the same as collaboration. And I like to say what I call use high bandwidth communication, um, which means that a lot of ideas are communicated both verbal and visually via different methods. Skype, telephone, whiteboards, and so forth. There's all kinds of tools that are available now to us. And so I like to stay away from email because email can sometimes be used as, I guess you could say, what I call CYA emails. You can see at the bottom there. A lot of people write documents and emails to avoid talking to each other, or possibly maybe they're too far away down the hall, something like that. And which actually brings up another aspect I like to have. And what I've seen is coffee rooms tend to be one of the best places for informal agile type meetings. Prototyping tools are good because they get thrown up quickly, and they should be welcomed as a way to collaborate rather than isolate people working by themselves. I think seems like I'm going backwards here, but we'll just keep going. Working software, I think it's important that you don't get stuck on what the definition of working is, and be flexible yet firm in what it is. So remember that working software is the purpose of it is to get feedback, and so feedback and collaboration is what we're going for, not necessarily perfect working software that we're not necessarily going to be delivering to the client. So every 2 weeks you may have a sprint and you want to have quote unquote working software, but if you're not delivering to the end user, which a lot of us don't, I've seen our clients, they may deliver software actually to their end user once a quarter or once a month. That means that every particular sprint, you don't have to have something working in a state that you would deliver it to a client. And so the purpose of working at that point is to really get feedback. Are you going in the right direction? So don't get hung up on having something perfect when it's really, the working software is really for collaboration. And like I said, with one of our clients that actually they used the number of 5,000. They said we've made 5,000 mistakes and we've learned a lot from that. So this next task should be easy. So, and that's with the top bullet there, the incomplete and imperfect designs. They should be welcomed, and they can be used to actually improve and lead to better collaboration amongst your teammates. The next thing here I'm going to call the long-term agile dot is actually, you've heard that it takes 21 days to form a habit. But actually, I believe that for agile, it takes much, much longer than that. From what I've seen, it probably takes between 6 and 9 months to successfully convert to agile if you're doing it quickly. And so, so once you've shifted over to agile, don't forget that don't expect too much of yourself in terms of you are going to make slips back into your old ways. Agile is like a diet, right? So a diet, you may go on for 3 weeks or 2 weeks or even a month, even 2 months. Maybe you're on a diet, or maybe you're getting ready for a wedding or something like that. But really, it's the beginning of a new lifestyle. So think about it in that sense that sometimes you're going to slip up and have a bag of potato chips. But really, you have to think about it from the long-term view, and don't be embarrassed if you're quote-unquote only 60% agile. Now let's look at some of these things and what that means. So, you may start off with iterations that are shorter or longer than 2 weeks. The point I'm trying to make here is that faster iterations are good in that you make mistakes and that you get to see see how you're doing together and get feedback on each other and on your process. But think about this, that the overhead associated with implementing Agile in the 2-week sprints is pretty great. Think about all the meetings that you're having, the grooming meetings, the planning meetings, the retrospective meeting. Those are going to be a lot more meetings than what you're used to having. And so there's no embarrassment to implementing things slowly. And nobody said that in order to be agile that you had to have a stand-up meeting every day. Maybe it's every other day, or maybe you decide you have it every day, but you're going to cut it off after so many minutes or whatever. The second thing is that I've been in stand-up meetings where everything is always normal or okay, and people want to go offline to discuss what's not okay. And to me, that's kind of a crime, because it really defeats the whole purpose of the stand-up meeting and the scrum meeting and working together. Because if you take it offline, let's suppose you meet with one other person or 2 other people, you're not really gathering the intelligence of the whole team. That's one. And so there are maybe other team members that know a lot about the problem that you don't know. You don't know they know about the problem or know how to potentially approach the problem. And secondly, they don't know how this may affect the entire project. So, and other pieces that other people are working on that are tying into yours, it's also important to let them know. And I've said this before about the committed and involved product owner. We covered that before. This would also be a long-term diet, part of your diet, your agile diet. So if the product owner is not there every day, that's the same thing as not conforming to your diet. More diet activities is to really think about downstream. It doesn't matter how fast you're developing and how many story points you're putting together, and how great your program is or your software is, if you don't have it continuously delivered and continuously integrated together. So a lot of people, a lot of our clients may not pay attention close enough to this in the beginning, but once you get this all running smoothly with development, tests, and operations working together, then you can begin to really see the benefits of Agile. Next, I'd like to talk about continuous improvement, and everybody talks about that, but you don't really think about how we're going to do it. The retrospectives are a key part of Agile, and the postmortems. And it's okay to have mistakes, and like I said here, eat too many desserts. And I think, though, what's important is that for each postmortem you may have 5 things that you decide that you're not doing well. And what I found that it's actually, it kind of jives with the metrics thing, is that it's best to focus on one thing. From the postmortem, you're going to have tens of I don't know about tens, but several items that need improvement. And what we find that works really well is to work on one item at a time, to really focus on that particular item to improve. I've seen this, and I find this actually works in many different domains. I do a lot of swimming, and I work with a swim coach, and they're always analyzing your stroke, and I'm probably doing 10 things wrong. And so what we do is we practice on fixing one thing at a time. And by fixing that one thing, by focusing on that one thing, I'm able to really get it fixed, rather than trying to improve the whole stroke all at one time. So I find that this really carries over to Agile. So if you're finding you're not doing well in one area, it's best to concentrate on that rather than try to fix everything at the same time. And this gets back to the continuous improvement. I think that a lot of people are afraid of metrics. A lot of people don't know why you would even want to use metrics in Agile, but it's really hard to become excellent if you don't measure something so that you can prove it. And it's important to think about metrics in terms of trends rather than numbers, and to think of them as a way to collaborate and a baseline for conversation. Metrics should be easy to collect. That's probably the number one thing. And the last thing about metrics is that they should reaffirm your Agile principles. So, so think about that. So we've talked about some things earlier like communication. What kinds of metrics could you form based on communication? Well, you could think about attendance to meetings. That could be a metric. You could think of many different metrics that you could collect, and it could be empirical items, like I'm saying here, in terms of done or not done, where you really just keep it simple. Remember that metrics are a way to support you rather than chastise people. So they're the beginning of a discussion, is what I say. Metrics are the beginning of a discussion, and they should be used to evaluate how you're doing. Also, it should be used as feedback, right? So you want to be able to look at metrics to redirect your priorities. So just a minute ago, I mentioned how when you do a retrospective, you may have 5 things that you need to work on. Metrics will enable you to possibly see which one of those 5 things are the most important ones. Here's just some common metric areas: workloads, testing results, delivery results, work item status, and so forth. I won't read through this. Number 7, making roles and responsibilities clear. So I think that one of the things I've heard about Agile is everybody's responsible for quality, everybody's responsible for the product and getting it out, but you still need people responsible for certain roles, and everybody. It's important to recognize that everybody has a forte of what they're good at. So if you take a football team, could Tom Brady play linebacker? Well, he's 6'4". He probably could play linebacker, but I think it's best that he play quarterback, right? So think about what everybody should do in terms of what their strong point is, not meaning that they can't do other things, right? Also recognize that there are going to be some weak links in your team, and weak links in the team will cause the team to go slower or fail. And it should be obvious what the weak link in the team is, because your whole working process should be very, very transparent. One other thing here that I haven't covered is the rotation of roles. If people have the skills, if it's a cross-functional team and some people have 2 to 3 skills, I think it's a good thing for people to swap roles. It's a good thing for the organization in terms of redundancy. It's also a good thing for people to work together and understand the problems that their coworkers are facing. It's also a good thing for the development of skills. So it's a good thing all the way around. The only problem that there is a price for that, because when you swap roles, sometimes it could be equivalent to swapping tasks, so there is some overhead involved. And also maybe it's not as strong a point it is for, maybe you're not as strong on that as you are some other skill, but it enables you to develop that skill as well. So I think that's definitely a win-win for the organization and the people involved in working, because some people may get bored of doing one thing all the time. Word about testing. This is ASTQB, so I think it has to do with testing, right? So I think that everybody talks about automation and how automation is necessary in Agile, and I think that's definitely true. Um, and one of the other things that I've seen is that automation teams are separate outside of the Agile team, and what we find that works better is to have if you're going to have automation, the automation people should be embedded inside the team, have regular, I guess you could say, manual testing expertise to understand clearly what needs to be automated and what should be automated. Because if you don't have that person right in the team, that makes it just another link in communication. And we found that automated testers or people with those skills really should be part of the cross-functional team within the Agile team. It's very difficult to have a automated tester automate tests without good domain knowledge and product knowledge. So you only get that by working very, very closely within the team. Oh, number 8. I thought there was 7. Shoot. Okay, 8. We got a bonus here. Team culture. One of the things that I discussed, I'd had a session yesterday on Agile metrics, and one of the metrics that we came up with in our class actually was that a team works better for 2 things. One of them is that the experience of the team members, and the second big factor that people don't think about is that velocity naturally increases as people work together. So the number of years that people are working together and the number of years of experience really impacts the team productivity. So, you need to think about people working together. Working in isolation is definitely needed sometimes, right? So sometimes people really need to get away and concentrate for a full day, right? But it's important to make those isolated moments very short and known. When somebody is missing for a day or two, or they disappear, and you don't have those skills covered, and that gets back to the first habit in terms of having the cross-functional team with team members that have more than one skill. Somebody's going to get sick, right? So when you have somebody missing, it's important that the other team members can pick up those skills. And think about it in terms of, you have an Agile team of 9 people, and everybody, a normal human being is going to get sick, say, 10 days a year. Think about the number of days. So that's 90 days a year that you're going to be missing a team member. So 90 days a year, that's 250 working days, right? That's 1/3 of the time. 1/3 of the time, somebody's going to be missing from your team. So you need to think about how you're going to handle that so that the team does not get delayed. And that's why I said changing roles is a good idea, not only to cross-train people in different skill areas, but to break up routine. And remember, there's a short-term cost to this in terms of productivity and cadence. You should plan for that. But overall, in the long term, your team is going to be much faster if you don't have to wait for somebody to come back to do something. More on team culture. We've heard about self-organizing and so forth, and I think that the one thing that that is important here is that the rhythm that people get with having a sprint is important from a human nature point of view, that everybody procrastinates. And so to kind of put that procrastination in shorter bites, we have these sprints help to control that procrastination. And so that's the advantage of having, to me, the sprints, is having a containerized procrastination, basically, And I think that that is containerized through having people make decisions from the bottom up, being in control of decisions rather than having decisions forced top down and being told to do something. Right? When you're told to do something, it's a lot more. It's more considered procrastination than if you are the one that are initiating the task and are responsible for getting stuff done and need to talk about it in a daily stand-up and so on. Let's see here. I think I've covered 8. Sorry, we gave a bonus, but let's talk about successfully going Agile. Agile is not a technique. It's not a technology. And I think I've talked to you about some cookbook recipes like Scrum and so forth. You can be Agile without a recipe, without a book, just like you can lose weight if you don't go to Weight Watchers. You know, Weight Watchers, they have these meals that they give you, and you're supposed to report it every 2 weeks and get weighed and so forth. You know, don't think that you have to go to Weight Watchers in order to be Agile. Agile is a set of principles, and really it just takes a lifestyle change. Instead of lifestyle, really it's a work style change in terms of thinking about getting feedback, right? So the whole thing about Agile was getting feedback and being able to shift and pivot and change based on requirements and so forth, and end up delivering what the customer wants. So those are the principles of Agile. It comes out that, you know, we have these recipes that call for 2 weeks at a time and so forth. Don't be embarrassed to say that your sprint is 3 weeks. And I like to close it off by thinking about Agile in terms of what I call the Be-Do-Have paradigm. And here's an example of what I call the high school Be-Do-Have, where, you know, we think that if we get a 6-pack of beer and we go to the beach, that we're going to have these results. We're going to have lots of friends and we're going to have lots of fun and things like that. But really it's about who we are that generates that. And it's not about the beer, it's not about the beach that gets us those results of having friends and having a good time. It's really about who we are. So what we do and where we go is really a function of who we are to get those results. And when I think about Agile, you know, these are the things that we're supposed to do, right? These are the things that go into the formula for Agile, you know, daily stand-ups, iterations, having a post-mortem, and so forth. But like I said before, I've seen a lot of teams to get together and have their stand-ups, and everything's normal, everything's okay, but really it's not. And so, you know, we expect to implement this process, but if we're just going through the motions, we're not going to get the results that we want. And so, you know, I think about, okay, so we do it through this process. These are the results that we want. Who do we have to be Agile? And I think that that being has to be people that are more flexible and willing, people that take initiative and don't wait to be told what to do, people that are responsive. And maybe this may take some retraining, not retraining in terms of going from C# to C++, but retraining in terms of how you communicate and work together. And this kind of behavioral change is something that takes time. So have patience with yourself. If you're converting to a different working style, it's the same thing, like I said, changing your diet, right? You implement one piece at a time. Tonight, or maybe perhaps you just say, okay, the first part of my diet is I'm not going to have desserts anymore. You know, maybe you implement one piece at a time and see how it goes. And so I challenge you to have what I call an Agile New Year's resolution. And the only part about Agile New Year's resolutions, or just like diet resolutions, is you see on January 1st, first week of January, you see the gym is really crowded. So, you know, our challenge is to really think about, you know, what we can maintain, what we can initiate on January 1st for our Agile resolution, and what we can maintain. Now, have I told you anything that you didn't know? Well, maybe, but maybe not. And so, I think that what I'm hoping is that, just like when you go to Weight Watchers, are they telling you anything that you don't need, that you don't know? That you should eat less desserts? That you should eat smaller portions? Probably not either. But I hope that I've reinforced what you know and shed a new angle on things that you heard, and possibly that you know now that eating fried foods is not good for you, right? So communicating is good. We all know that. I think that everybody knows what Agile is about and what we should do in Agile. The problem is really actually doing it, right? We all know fried foods are bad for us. The question is, can you avoid driving over to Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? I think that's all I have for today. Dave, I think it's 12:47. We have several minutes left over. Are there any questions that come in?
Yeah, there are some questions, and I'll run through those. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to, again, type them into your control panel. I mean, overall, Phil, great job on this. I think there is a lot of great food for thought, no pun intended there. There's some excellent reinforcement of the various points, and I really think your examples were spot on and very helpful. I am going to backtrack a little bit with a question, which is maybe bigger process, but how do you handle it if the client shows up with a team that is just too large, or if your boss or someone in the company is kind of trying to foist that extra large team on you? Do you accept it and try and manage it, or do you push back? And how do you do it if you're hired in? It becomes very complex, and I think that felt like that was an area that could really trip up a lot of the rest of the process. Any thoughts on that? Any suggestions?
Well, there's quite a few, like I say, recipes in terms of breaking up or scaling up Agile. And so basically, it's just a question of breaking up the task into smaller features. The only problem is that, of course, like I said during the talk about the overhead associated. So now you have smaller teams. Say you break up a 30-person team into 3 groups of 10. Now you've got to have a layer of overhead on top of that, right? So that's the problem that people have. I think I still recommend having groups of teams of 10 or less working together. The question is, how do you scale that up in terms of integrating the work that they're doing across the teams? But that's a whole other issue. I still like to fight for the small team.
Right. No, that makes sense, and that's really good. Another point that you had mentioned earlier on, so maybe you can give some real life examples here, or maybe you need to change the names to protect the innocent. But you had mentioned that the weak link would be obvious, and in your experience, what do you tend to see as being the weak link? Is it an experience level? Is it a skill level? Is it a personality type? Or is it something even more specific than any of those?
Typically, it has to do with a skill level. Programming skills in terms of speed, efficiency, and mistakes that are made. On that side, on the testing and QA side, you've got people that possibly were manual testers in the beginning, and now they're being asked to write some code, right? And they may not have that kind of training. So in that case, then they need to be trained, and that's fairly obvious. The other thing that people don't like to talk about really is that you have some personality conflicts, and whenever you have somebody that brings the team down, it's a big deal actually when you have a small team working together, and it brings down the whole room, right? It's just like a small family, and those kind of people that are disruptive, the HR person there, or the product owner, or whoever there's in charge of putting the team together has to step to the plate and take that team member out. It's just, those are hard things to do, but they have to be done.
Right, right. And it's good to have, hopefully you have a broad supportive organization there and you don't need to muddle your way through. But that does seem to be probably a crucial issue given all of the other context that you've described here. All right, so I have one more question unless any others come in here shortly, and then we'll wrap it up. But you mentioned several metrics, and I know you didn't want to read through the list of those, but everyone talks about velocity, but what metrics do you think, I mean, for the average project, and I know there is no average project, but what metrics do you see as being the most important? If you can only focus on a couple of them, what would they be?
Well, I'll focus on, I guess, a set of them. I think of velocity as a resulting metric, kind of an end metric. So, if I carry that diet paradigm one step further, if you got on the scale and weighed yourself, that's too late, basically. You're finding out what the result was, right? So really in a diet, you think about, okay, well, I want to exercise more. How far did I run? I would measure what I ate. I would measure the contents of what I ate, whether I ate a lot of fat or sugar and things like that. So when you carry that over to Agile, if you're measuring velocity, that's really the same thing as measuring your weight. It's at the end. And so the set of the things that I would measure, that we recommend measuring before the end, are some of the things that you're doing in your work content. The amount of time that you spend fixing bugs, that would be measured, right? Because that's a velocity inhibitor. The amount of time that you spend in overtime, that is because overtime is directly related to, if you do we've looked at some of our client data, the overtime is directly related to defects. So the more overtime you have, the more defects you have, especially if you have what's called unplanned overtime, right? And of course, if you have more unplanned overtime over time, then you get turnover, and turnover in turn affects the productivity of the team, right? So it's really the work, I would say, measuring your work content is a big deal in terms of getting to that velocity.
Oh, that's excellent information. Some really good areas to focus on there. Some really great metrics. That's all we have time for right now. I want to thank you again. Just an outstanding presentation. Some nice comments come in from various members of the audience. Just so everyone is aware, in case you have a colleague that would benefit from this presentation, or you want to share it more broadly, we have recorded it. We will follow up and send out an email when that recording is available. It will be on the ASTQB website, and as I had mentioned before, you will also find there the information on the ASTQB Agile certification. All of that can be found at www.astqb.org. We hope you'll join us for future ASTQB webinars. But at this point, I'd like to thank Phil once again. Great job, and we look forward to talking to you again sometime in the future.
Okay, thanks, Dave.